On World News Tonight, President Bush says he's defending civilization, and he tells the Russian president to be careful with what he's doing in Iran. The FBI informer who knew a September hijacker. The FBI did not perceive him as dangerous, an ABC News exclusive. The Archbishop accused of sexual assault and paying off the other man involved, an ABC News investigation. What a difference the internet has made to missing children. The recovery rate has been increased dramatically. And it may be the water myth. We've heard it for years, 8 glasses of water a day. Really?
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. President Bush is in Russia tonight. He's never been there before. When Mr. Bush has a formal summit meeting with the Russian president, his friend Vladimir Putin, tomorrow, they will do something Mr. Bush often said he did not want to do, sign a nuclear arms reduction agreement. Today, Mr. Bush was also in Germany, hasn't been there before. His theme throughout the day has been terrorism, and ABC's Terry Moran is with him.
Hand in hand, the president and the first lady arrived in Russia for a different kind of summit in Moscow. Aides say Mr. Bush sees this trip as a chance to lay the foundation for a new era of close cooperation with Russia, especially in the war on terrorism, which President Putin has enthusiastically supported. But earlier in Berlin, the president also had a blunt warning to Putin about a growing concern: Russia's help in building a nuclear reactor in Iran.
Is that if you arm Iran, you're liable to get the weapons pointed at you.
That kind of tough talk dominated Mr. Bush's speech to the German parliament as he tried to rally or frighten wavering Europeans into supporting the war.
In this war, we defend not just America or Europe, we are defending civilization itself.
The president's speech was disrupted by a protest staged by far-left legislators, which seemed to startle him. But his answer to such concerns was a stark warning: you could be next.
Those who despise human freedom will attack it on every continent. Those who seek missiles and terrible weapons are also familiar with the map of Europe.
At his press conference with German Chancellor Schroeder, Mr. Bush pressed his case, especially for taking on Iraq and its weapons of mass destruction. A highly unpopular idea here, but a problem he said must be dealt with.
We can play like it's not there. We can hope it goes away. But that's not going to work. That's not going to make us safer.
Making the world safer is what the White House says the new U.S.-Russia relationship is all about. And the two presidents will take a historic first step along that path tomorrow, when they sign the nuclear arms treaty that will reduce warheads by 2/3 on each side. Terry Moran, ABC News, with the president in Moscow.
A little later in the broadcast, ABC's Claire Shipman, who used to be boasted in Moscow, will take a closer look at the Russian leader, Mr. Putin. Before leaving Germany today, President Bush said he did not support an independent commission to investigate whether the government missed warning signs before September the 11th. Mr. Bush said it would compromise U.S. intelligence. The warnings in effect for New York City landmarks now include a threat to the subways and trains in the city. Once again, the threats are vague and unconfirmed. The Transportation Department says that transit systems across the country should stay on a state of alert. The government says the so-called shoe bomber Richard Reed, who was subdued by other passengers on a flight to Miami last Christmas, wanted to destroy an airplane during the holidays in order to ruin the airline industry. More tonight on the FBI and the September 11th hijackers. There's been speculation for weeks now about how much the government actually knew about what a group of Middle Eastern men taking flight training in Arizona was up to. Well, ABC News has learned that the FBI got very close to the hijacker believed to have been on a jet into the Pentagon on September the 11th. The problem was the FBI's informant had no idea who he was on to. ABC's John McCarthy has an exclusive report from Washington.
Alkai Collins says he was paid $2,500 a month as an FBI informant in Phoenix. In a stunning disclosure to ABC News, he claims that 3 years before September 11th, he began providing the FBI with information about Hani Hanjour, a young Saudi who later helped fly hijacked American Airlines Flight 77 into the side of the Pentagon. They knew he lived in Phoenix. They knew his phone number. They knew
his address. They knew what he drove. They knew everything there was to know about the guy.
The FBI emphatically denies that Collins provided any information about Hani Hanjour, but they do admit that they paid Collins to monitor the Islamic and Arab communities of Phoenix because of his unusual background. A self-styled Islamic holy warrior, Collins was born in the U.S. In trouble with police as a teenager, he says he found religion, Islam, and eventually went overseas to fight. In Chechnya, he lost his leg to a landmine. Once in Phoenix in 1996, the FBI asked Collins to focus on a group of young Arab men, many of whom were taking flying lessons. Hani Hanjour was part of the group.
They drank alcohol, they messed around with girls and stuff like that. They all lived in an apartment together, Hani and the others.
Collins said he provided the FBI with basic facts, letting the FBI take it from there.
And when I said there's this, short, skinny Arab guy who's part of this crowd, drives, such and such a car, I assumed that they would then, start tracing him and see who his contacts are.
The FBI in Phoenix either failed to monitor Hanjour's communications, or Hanjour himself practiced extraordinary skill in hiding his intentions, because the FBI never regarded him as a threat. Much to the dismay of the FBI, Collins has written a book about his exploits, soon to be published, called My Jihad. The FBI was not alone in failing to predict Hanjour and his group were dangerous.
I can't figure it out either. How they went from their backyard to flying airplanes into buildings.
Congress cannot figure it out either, as it continues to demand answers from the FBI. John McWethy, ABC News, Washington.
In the other news today, the Catholic Archbishop of Milwaukee has asked the Vatican to push forward his retirement day, which he had already planned. Rembert Weekland, a much-respected figure in the Catholic Church, was responding to an ABC report this morning that he used $450,000 in church money to pay a man who accused him of sexual assault. A story that ABC's Brian Ross has been investigating. The details, Brian.
Peter, Archbishop Weekland, who has put into effect a zero-tolerance policy on sexual abuse by priests, today denied he had ever abused anyone. But he did not dispute our report about the large payment, raising many questions about his use of church money. The Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled 7 years ago the Catholic Church cannot be sued in that state. And under Archbishop Weekland, the church has rejected cash settlements in more than 70 cases involving alleged pedophile priests. But 4 years ago, when the accusations involved the Archbishop himself and an adult male, Weekland authorized the $450,000 payment on the condition his accuser keep quiet.
I've been involved in the cover-up. I accepted money to be silent about it, not to speak out against what was going on.
53-year-old Paul Marcoux says the Archbishop assaulted him sexually 22 years ago after they had dinner to discuss his joining the priesthood.
Think of it in terms of date rape.
It was 1997 when Archbishop Weekland had risen to prominence in the church that Marcoux threatened to file suit and make public his allegations, plus an 11-page letter the Archbishop had written to Marcoux saying, "I felt like the world's worst hypocrite, so I gradually came back to the importance of celibacy in my life." That's not blackmail?
Well, some will view it as that, I suppose, but it was an attempt.
What would you call it?
A settlement for a sexual assault case.
Today, the 75-year-old Archbishop Weekland said he was asking the Vatican to speed up acceptance of his resignation, mandatory at his age. And in a statement, the Archbishop, considered an intellectual leader of the church, said the $450,000 payment was a fair use of church money, given all he had raised as Archbishop, Peter, over the last 25 years.
Many thanks, Brian. Brian Ross. In the national briefing tonight, law enforcement sources tell ABC News the remains of the Washington intern Chandra Levy are so decomposed they may never learn how she died. Police are now focused on a man in jail who was convicted of attacking 2 women joggers last summer in the same Washington park where Ms. Levy's remains were found. 200 farmers in South Texas parked a column of tractors and pickup trucks across the bridge to Mexico today. They say they're going to block traffic because Mexico has not delivered the river water that it promised, and it's been a very dry winter along the border. And a dispute about commercial whaling led the International Whaling Commission to revoke whaling rights for the Inuit and the Makah Indians of Washington State. The tribes have been allowed to harpoon a few rare whales each year in a ritual hunt for food. Later in the broadcast, we'll take a closer look at how parents are finding their missing children faster. When we come back, a very popular authoritarian, the former KGB agent, is getting along with the Russian people, and what everyone knows about water. 8 glasses a day may be healthy, but it is certainly not mandatory.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by York Heating and Air Conditioning.
In Washington today, the Congress honored law enforcement officers who have located missing children in the last year. There are about 725,000 missing children cases a year in the United States. Most children are found, but it can take a very long time. We're going to take a closer look tonight at solving some of the tougher cases more quickly. Here's ABC's Michelle Norris.
When Elizabeth Norton's 2 sons did not return home after a visit with her ex-husband, she immediately posted the boys' photos on as many websites as possible.
Every single day I was on the internet, and I prayed every day that they would come home.
Norton had no idea her boys had been taken to a California trailer park. It was only through the internet that the boys were found.
Technology has enabled us to dramatically shorten the lead time in the search for a missing child.
A neighbor in California suspected the boys may have been abducted. The neighbor found this website, simply clicked on the word search, then typed in the younger boy's name, Jonathan.
Jonathan's picture appeared among the other missing Jonathans, and there was no mistaking him.
Norton's ex-husband was arrested. The boys returned home. Law enforcement officers say advances in technology have dramatically improved the recovery rate for missing children. 10 years ago, 62% of missing children were returned. Today, that number is 93%.
What used to take weeks now takes minutes.
Using the internet, police can immediately saturate the country with photos, which in turn can be printed onto postcards or posters. With new software, forensic artists can manipulate a photo to show how a child matures.
Technology has made the difference, but it's of little use if parents can't provide accurate information.
A survey found that 1 in 4 parents could not provide a detailed description of their child.
Eye color is bluish green. Height, I haven't a clue.
She's 3 feet 6, something like that.
It is vital that parents be able to describe their child with precision.
Hundreds of children go missing every day. Precise information and the power of technology can make all the difference in bringing them back home. Michelle Norris, ABC News, Washington.
We have one brief item about sports tonight. Sam Snead, the man who won more golfing titles than anyone else, has died. That's him with the hat. He won 81 PGA Tour events. There's a lot to be said about him. He once said himself that he owed all his hand-eye coordination to a childhood spent squirrel hunting in rural Virginia. He was 89 years old, and golfers will be talking about him for ages. When we continue this evening, the president's host in Russia. Something of a mystery. And Americans drinking so much water every day. The bottled water industry loves it. But do Americans need to drink so much? The overseas briefing today begins in Israel. A bomb attached to a tanker truck exploded at the country's largest fuel depot north of Tel Aviv. It set off a fire. It was put out immediately. The Israeli embassy in Paris was destroyed by a fire today. Police believe the most likely cause was an electrical fault. No one was inside at the time. A very frail Pope John Paul arrived in Bulgaria today. On his first visit there, the Pope, who was 82 and sounding short of breath, had an aide read most of his speech. In northern Afghanistan, another 500 fighters were released from the overcrowded prison we reported on earlier this week. The U.S. says it has already removed all the prisoners that it believes are important. As we said at the beginning of the broadcast, President Bush is in Russia this evening for a summit meeting tomorrow with President Putin. The relationship between the two countries has changed quite dramatically since the first President Bush was there. Still, a recent poll of Russians found that only 25% regard the United States as a friendly nation. An ABC News poll finds that 62% of Americans think the Russians are friendly. ABC's Claire Shipman used to live in Russia, and she reports tonight that a Russian leader is always news.
Vladimir Putin sharing traditional marinated mushrooms with Russian villagers. At times, his enormous popularity seems to catch even him by surprise. When Putin took office 2 years ago, many in the West saw him as little more than an ex-KGB thug. Today, despite a 70% approval rating, he remains something of a puzzle, a man of contrasts. It turns out he has a remarkable common touch, grieving with victims of a terrorist bombing, begging for a bite of a little boy's ice cream. He is also right at home with all the trappings and power of a czar. He's supported market reforms, the economy is improving, and he's been able, for the most part, to pay wages and pensions on time. But there is this.
Every democratic institution in Russia today is weaker than it was 2 years ago when Putin came to power. He says the right things, but he does the wrong things.
Putin has run the independent media out of business, weakened the parliament, and used the war on terror to justify a brutal war in Chechnya. He openly courts Iran and North Korea, at the same time pursuing a firm friendship with the United States. In the end, Putin may not be all that different from some of the other leaders who ruled from behind the Kremlin walls. He might be called an authoritarian reformer. What's interesting is that the United States, which usually prefers to cast Russian leaders as either good or bad, seems willing to accept a more complex view of this man. And Russians seem willing to trade some liberties for stability. They like a strong leader who flies in a fighter plane over Chechnya and shows off his judo. In fact, a Soviet-style Putin cult is blooming, complete with a board game called The Manager in his honor. He says he doesn't like the fawning, but then again, when the press here offered a more critical view, Vladimir Putin shut them down. Claire Shipman, ABC News, Moscow.
When we come back, the final item in our broadcast tonight, all that water that Americans are supposed to drink, it may be the bottling companies who benefit the most. Finally, this evening we focus on a number that has somehow come to represent the truth. Americans have been taught for years that 8 glasses of water a day is what the body needs. But why do we believe it? We talked to one nutritionist today who thought she read it in a book somewhere, but she couldn't remember for sure. Here's ABC's Ned Potter.
If the human body is more than 60% water, how much water should you drink every day?
8 glasses.
8 glasses of 8 ounces.
8 full glasses, minimum.
All right, 8 glasses. Where'd you hear that?
Something I've read about.
Well, when you were growing up, they're always telling you 8 glasses a day.
I think I heard it from my mom.
Your mom's advice was not wrong, but it turns out there's no way to prove it's right either. 8 glasses of fluid a day are perfectly healthy, but nutritionists tell us they cannot find a study that specifies that number.
For scientists, academics, to have to admit they don't know the origin of something is very frustrating.
Nevertheless, magazines, self-help books, and commercials have been telling people for years to drink hearty.
Nutritionists recommend 8 glasses of water daily for good health.
And if it's good for you, it's even better for the industry. Bottled water is the fastest growing drink in America. By 2005, analysts predicted it will be outselling coffee or milk. The International Bottled Water Association has a hydration calculator on its website. I tell it how much I weigh, how much I've exercised today, and it'll tell me that I need about 10 glasses of water. The National Academy of Sciences hopes to put out new water guidelines by next March. In the meantime, all doctors can say is, it's better than soda pop.
Drinking water instead of sugary drinks for most of us is a good thing. But do we need to be carrying a water bottle around all day? I don't think so.
So no question, plenty of water is healthy. But are you really that thirsty? Ned Potter, ABC News, New York.
That is our report on World News Tonight. Tomorrow on the broadcast, the pop star and the Treasury Secretary on a mission to Africa. Don't forget Nightline. Good night.